Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Now, before I get started, take a look at the slide here. For those who would like to participate, please gather some of the items that are listed here. The pencil, paper, calculator, or your phone. Have an open space that's free of clutter, a chair, a bare wall, and if possible, have some cans, jugs, weights, and a grocery bag. Welcome to our coffee and a chat. My name is Gail Morgan, and along with me this morning is Selena Ramsey and Ian Canoli. We present community experts to discuss different topics that are related to brain health, age-related topics, or health in general. During today's discussion, we'll be talking about exercise. Our speakers today both work in the Okanwa Research Lab. Hopefully I pronounced that better than I did earlier. In the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center in UW-Madison, where they conduct minimal graded exercise testing on research participants, among other things. The lab focuses on modifiable and non-modifiable factors linked to cognitive resilience in Alzheimer's disease. Sarah Luce is our exercise physiologist and research program manager of the Okanwa lab. She received her bachelor's degree in kinesiology from UW-Eau Claire and her master's degree in human performance with an applied sports science emphasis from UW-La Crosse. Dr. Brienbach is an exercise physiologist and postdoctoral fellow. She received her bachelor's degree in exercise science from St. Ambrose University, her master's degree in kinesiology with an emphasis in clinical cardiac rehab from Eastern Illinois University, and her PhD in exercise physiology from Texas A&M University. So let's welcome our speakers today.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So, hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. We're so excited to be engaging with the community and sharing our love for exercise and the benefits for better brain health. This is a great forum where we can share scientifically backed resources as well as engage our audience all over and putting that into practice. Exercise, movement, and physical activity are central to mine and Sarah's lives, and so we're really excited to share that passion with you. I want to preface by stating that we work in Alzheimer's disease research, which is why we're focused on brain health, but do realize that exercise benefits every aspect of your health. So we'll start the presentation by laying the foundation for normal versus abnormal brain aging. Next, we'll dive into some of the research supporting physical activity, exercise, cardiorespiratory fitness, and brain health. Following that, we'll do a section on how to exercise supported by the research. And then finally, we'll put all of this info into practice with an exercise program. And we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So let's kick things off by talking about brain aging. After all, we need to understand how the brain changes during normal and abnormal aging and what we can do to slow that down. Let's start off by making one thing clear. A decline in cognitive abilities is a normal part of aging. What we are concerned with is an abnormal decline in cognitive abilities as one gets older. So as you can see by the red line, individuals with mild cognitive impairment and dementia have a steeper, more rapid decline than what is seen with normal aging. When they reach that dotted line of clinical impairment, that is when they've reached a point where they're no longer able to compensate for that decline. So what's important to note is that Alzheimer's disease is also characterized by internal pathology that's accumulating in the brain over many years. likely decades before clinical symptoms present themselves. And it's this cascade of years of pathological changes that then leads to cognitive impairment and the eventual inability to complete daily activities. There are two defining hallmarks of Alzheimer's pathology: amyloid plaques and tau neurofibrillary tangles. It's believed that amyloid accumulates in the neurons first, then followed by tau accumulating outside the neurons. So the accumulation of amyloid and tau result in fewer nerve cells and synapses, which are the basis for cognitive function, leading to structural changes in the brain, particularly shrinking and thinning, which you can see here. There's also other notable changes like a decrease in glucose metabolism, or in other words, the brain's ability to utilize its main fuel source, glucose. Just like any disease, there are a number of different factors that increase one's risk for developing mild cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's. Non-modifiable risk factors are those you cannot change. So this includes your genes, your family history, and the biggest risk factor of them all, aging. We can't change our genes, we can't choose our family, and we can't stop getting older, no matter how much some of us may want to. Modifiable risk factors, on the other hand, are those things that you can change. So you have control over these risk factors. Some examples include sleep habits, diet, smoking, education, and physical activity, which is what we're focusing on today. So this graph shows the estimated number of Alzheimer's disease cases that could be prevented by reducing the prevalence of modifiable risk factors like physical inactivity, depression, smoking, hypertension, obesity, low educational attainment, diabetes, and finally, the combined impact of these 7 factors. So for example, it's estimated that reducing physical inactivity by 25%, shown in red here, could prevent about 200,000 Alzheimer's cases. And as you can see with the connecting arrows, addressing physical inactivity would directly affect 4 other risk factors as well. Physical activity is known to reduce depression, lower blood pressure, help with weight loss, and control blood sugar. So addressing the issue of physical inactivity would actually have a multiplied effect on a number of these factors. Hopefully you're beginning to see that eliminating physical inactivity could have an important effect on Alzheimer's disease risk. In the next section, we'll go deeper and talk about the evidence supporting why physical activity, exercise, and cardiorespiratory fitness supports a healthy brain. So we first need to define physical activity, exercise, and fitness, because while they're used interchangeably, they're actually unique terms. Physical activity is a behavior and encompasses any bodily movement resulting in energy expenditure. So it's a big overarching term. It can be taking the stairs, doing dishes, walking to the mailbox. But as you can see, not all physical activity is created equal. We measure it in the lab through self-report questionnaires, or it can be directly measured through actigraphy, which is a special device worn like a watch that uses an accelerometer to track the level of activity and how much is done. Exercise then is a subset of physical activity. It's activity that is planned, structured, and repetitive in nature. Examples of this are going on an intentional brisk walk around the neighborhood, or going to the gym and lifting weights. Lastly, fitness is a measurable characteristic. It is your body's ability to do and maintain exercise. And then there are 2 different kinds: aerobic, also known as cardiorespiratory fitness, and muscular fitness. Like the name sounds, cardiorespiratory fitness represents the capacity for the heart and lungs to supply oxygen to the skeletal muscle system. Think of activities that get your heart rate up. So being able to walk 60 minutes versus 30 minutes at the same pace. It can be measured in a number of ways, but the gold standard is through a graded maximal exercise test, where we collect inspired and expired gases using a special computer that then tells us the oxygen uptake. So let's start talking about what the research shows us regarding physical activity, exercise, and aerobic fitness and the brain. This model here demonstrates that exercise affects brain changes and cognition, but researchers are still trying to uncover the details of how changes in the brain affect cognition. It is becoming clear that the brain is capable of adapting more robustly than we used to think was possible. So doing things like growing new brain cells, making those brain cells healthier and more efficient, and adapting the vascular system to supply the brain cells with vital nutrients. So the next slide will briefly touch on those specific changes related to physical activity, exercise, and fitness as a whole. But keep in mind, I'm grouping those three things together when in reality, they are unique terms. Well, I won't be diving too much into the specifics. Research supports that physical activity, exercise, or fitness are associated with decreased amyloid accumulation. Remember, that's part of Alzheimer's pathology. Increased brain volume for certain areas of the brain, like our memory center, enhanced blood flow to the brain, improved fuel delivery and uptake, and positive effects on cognition, mood, and neurotransmitter release. So the mechanisms underlying these changes are complex and still under active investigation, but it can be primarily linked to myokines and metabolites released by the contracting muscles during exercise. As I wrap up this section, I want to cover one more topic about the effects of exercise on the body. So these effects are a bit more tangible than the detailed mechanisms we've talked about. So I hope this really sticks with you. Well, everyone is going to have their own experience and feelings from exercise. There's a substantial amount of research suggesting that exercise makes us feel good. Just a few examples: affect, sleep, measures of well-being, quality of life, and anger control all increase from exercising. And depression, fatigue, stress, sense of burden, and distress go down as a result from exercising regularly. Now that we've talked about all the benefits that come with exercise, let's talk about how to exercise.
All right. Thank you, Bree, for giving us that background about why we want to start exercising. So now you're telling yourself, I want to exercise. What does that mean? Well, you need to consider a couple different things when starting an exercise program. And these parameters make up exercise, and they're important because they're going to determine what benefits you will attain. And so these are the type and intensity of the exercise, the duration of an exercise session, the frequency in which you're exercising, and the length of time of an exercise program. So I'm going to dive into each of these a little bit more, and what the research tells us are the ideal characteristics of exercise training to attain brain health benefits. However, it's important, especially when first starting out, that each individual should determine their starting point and set personal goals that will keep them progressing towards these ideal characteristics of exercise training. I also need to tell you that it is important that you consult with your physician before starting an exercise program so they can discuss safety and appropriateness with you based on your personal circumstances. So let's start with type of exercise. There's actually many different types of exercise. We have aerobic-based exercise. So these are things that get your heart rate up and focuses on your cardiorespiratory fitness, as Bree mentioned. So these are things such as walking, running, cycling, swimming, rowing, and so forth. We have resistance-based exercises that focus on your muscular fitness, so building your muscular strength and endurance, so lifting weights, using resistance bands. And then there's more functional-based exercises such as stretching, balance, yoga. And then lastly, we can combine all of these different types of exercise together to create a new type of multimodal exercise. And ideally, we do all of these to some extent, but in reality, you may enjoy some of them more than others. And really, the key is choosing what you enjoy most. And even if it's not necessarily the exercise that's best supported by research. So for example, stretching may not give you the same level of brain health benefits as, say, aerobic exercise. It's still a great place to start because it may get you interested in those other types of exercise. And it also gets you just into the habit of exercising itself. So your next question then is, how intense should my exercise be? Well, intensity is simply how hard are you working? It's usually broken into light, moderate, and vigorous categories. And there are benefits at all levels, but really that moderate intensity and above is likely what's needed to truly attain benefits. And there are a couple ways to measure intensity without any fancy gadgets. First one being your heart rate. It's a very simple marker for intensity. The faster your heart rate, the harder you're working. You can also use your breathing and your ability to talk as a marker of intensity. It's called the talk test. So if your breathing feels light, you can speak normally or sing, you're working at a light intensity. If your breathing's heavier and you can talk but not sing, you're working at a moderate intensity. And if you're breathing very heavily and you can only say a few words at a time without having to take a breath, then you're working at a vigorous intensity. Okay, so now that you've determined those two things, you need to think about how long you plan to exercise each time. And this can vary quite a bit based on numerous factors, such as the intensity and type of exercise you're choosing to do, the amount of time you set aside to exercise, and how many days a week you're planning to exercise. Therefore, the research varies because of this, but in general, exercise sessions should be at least 30 minutes, if not more. And if you're new to exercise, as I mentioned before, start small and build your way up. Try to start with 10-minute blocks and then go from there to progressively reach longer durations. Okay, and now the next bigger picture question is, how many days a week will you exercise? And the research shows that between 2 to 4 days a week is really all that's needed to attain brain health benefits. And this doesn't mean that doing more exercise is bad. It's just that the research hasn't focused on more than 2 to 4 days because it can be hard to get people to exercise in general, let alone more than 4 days a week. So last characteristic I want to talk about here then is the length of time of an exercise program. And this is really big picture. And research tells us that it takes some time for brain health benefits to occur from exercise. So at least 3 months of consistent exercise is needed to start seeing some benefits, though some types of benefits may take longer, like 6 months. It's also important to note this doesn't mean you can just stop exercising after 3 months and say, great, I'm done, I've got my benefits. Doesn't work like that. You need to keep up the exercise to maintain those benefits. So exercise really should be a consistent habit going forward. Okay. So briefly then summarizing everything I just talked about here, these are those ideal characteristics for brain health. And what's interesting as we look at these is that they fall well in line with the physical activity recommendations that we've probably all heard of at this point. 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity exercise. And while those recommendations weren't made specifically for brain health, it looks like they can be applied to brain health as well. Another easy way to think about exercise for a lot of people is daily number of steps. And a recent study looked at this, and they actually found that number of steps we take in a day and the intensity of those steps are related to risk for dementia. So as little as 3,800 steps a day can reduce your risk for dementia by 25%. And 9,800 steps a day can further reduce your risk by 50%. But what's also important to note is that the intensity of those steps seem to matter. So purposefully walking at a quick tempo can reduce your risk even further. Okay. All right, so when it comes to implementing exercise, it always seems a lot easier said than done. And we've talked about all of these, great benefits and how to do it, yet why is it so difficult for so many people to do? Well, there's barriers, and I'll be honest, there are a lot of them, and they can be specific to certain groups like caregivers or parents, or universal to just about everyone. And barriers typically relate to a lack of support, be that from people around you or lack of resources, logistical obstacles like geographical isolation or scheduling constraints, psychological matters like simply not wanting to exercise, your attitude towards exercise, feeling anxiety over starting a program, financial constraints, not being able to afford gym membership or equipment, and then physical limitations from fatigue or health problems. And so it's important to understand that many barriers don't fall into a single category, even the ones I just gave as examples. In fact, most of them fall into multiple categories, meaning they're complex and there are multiple layers to them. And so we don't have time to go through all the different barriers that there are, but I'm just going to focus on a few of the more common ones that I think are of particular importance to recognize. And the first one being lack of time. And this may be the biggest and most well-documented barrier because this one barrier affects and is affected by numerous other barriers. It often, though not always, comes from a lack of prioritization, not necessarily a lack of time. So think about what commitments you already have. Some are non-negotiable, whereas others can be prioritized. So ask yourself, are you prioritizing your exercise? You may also be unsure how to start. Exercise can be intimidating if you have not done it before or if you haven't created a habit out of it. And all those characteristics I just talked about can be overwhelming to a beginner and frankly can be overwhelming to just anyone doing exercise. So not knowing what to do when you get to the gym can have a big toll on your motivation to begin exercising. So you may be prepared mentally to exercise, but actually beginning the exercise is the problem. And then the last barrier I want to touch on is fatigue. And fatigue can be mental or physical. It comes from being overworked and participating in duties that can be physically demanding. And exercise itself takes a lot of energy. So when your mind and or your body don't feel ready or capable of exercising, initiating an exercise session can be particularly difficult. So it's crucial for us to recognize and acknowledge that we're going to face barriers to exercise, and they're going to come in all shapes and sizes, because without doing that, overcoming the barriers will be an even bigger challenge. With that said, I don't want you to lose hope because there are just as many facilitators to exercise that we can implement to overcoming these barriers. And just like barriers, there's also a lot of overlap between these facilitators, meaning some facilitators may result in tackling multiple barriers at one time. So again, can't go through all of them, but I'm going to highlight just a few that I think are particularly impactful and may resonate with some of you. So the first one is using an exercise journal. It can be a great tool to help keep you on track of your exercise and support yourself and your habit psychologically. So an exercise journal can be very simple, just a few columns like the example you can see on the slide here. Entries are really minimal, so it takes just like less than 30 seconds to do, but overall can make a big difference in terms of your accountability to yourself. So by logging each day that you exercise, it serves to cue you to keep up your exercise streak. It makes that feeling of accomplishment a little bit more tangible. By recording how you felt from your session, you might be able to encourage yourself to exercise, the next day, because that visual reminder that exercise felt good makes you want to exercise again, to get that feeling again. Another facilitator to exercise is exercising with others. So whether that's one other person or multiple, I've seen it work time and time again, both in the real world and in research. It is a great facilitator to exercise. Your exercise partner could be a personal trainer, a friend or family member, coworker, it could be anyone. And having that exercise partner helps to keep you accountable, because the idea of skipping your exercise isn't just letting yourself off the hook, you're now leaving your partner hanging too. Your exercise partner may also help you figure out where to start, even if you're both beginners, because tackling a problem together can be easier than tackling it by yourself. Exercising with others also just makes many people feel good. So that social interaction can boost your mood. It makes the exercise itself more enjoyable and can make the time fly by, especially if you're one that doesn't actually enjoy exercising. And then, so because of this, I'd like to actually encourage all of you to think of someone who could be your exercise partner and consider reaching out to them to suggest the idea. And even if you're not able to get together in person with your exercise partner or someone else who exercises, consider scheduling post-exercise session phone calls to help, again, keep you accountable and get a little bit of that social interaction as well. Another great facilitator exercise is actually home-based programs, and they're great for a variety of reasons. It can be easier to work out away from strangers to reduce anxiety or nervousness, not having people look at you while you're exercising. And there are a lot of free online programs you can follow, many of which don't require purchasing equipment because either no equipment's needed or you can use items around your house, as we'll show you a little bit later. And by working out at home, you can save time traveling to the gym. You can potentially have more flexibility in your exercise schedule. So if you combine the two strategies we just talked about, exercise with a family member and do it at home, you can watch those barriers start to crumble down. Last thing I want to touch on then are cues. So these are fantastic technique to use to get moving. And you can think of them as nudges that kind of help prime you for exercise or remind you to exercise. So this can be something like always exercising after you brush your teeth. It's part of your routine. It's at a set time of the day. You could leave your yoga mat out in the living room, so you reach for that instead of the remote to watch TV. You can lay out your exercise clothes the night before, so you see it and reminds you, oh, yep, need to exercise. Or simply put on your exercise clothes, especially on those days where you don't feel like exercising. So getting started can feel like the hardest part. So something like putting on your exercise clothes, well, that's your first step to exercising. So make that the small goal, just getting dressed to exercise. If you get dressed, you still don't feel like exercising, you know what, that's okay. We're all human. So you can allow yourself to take a pass or try some of the other techniques that we've talked about. All right, and then my last thing here before we actually get into some exercise, I just want to mention that we really like to think of exercise as medicine. And that's because people who get the most benefit, both physically and mentally from their exercise, take their exercise like a pill at regular dose, at regular intervals throughout the week. But we also recognize that taking your exercise medicine is not the same thing as taking a pill. Motivation can rise, motivation can fall. And so then when that happens, in addition to those techniques and nudges that I just talked about, I'd encourage you to tackle motivation with two other strategies. The first one is to think about the why of exercise. So we've already done that today. That's how we started our presentation here. Thinking about why we exercise. What are those physical changes that happen to the brain? What's going to happen to my mood and well-being? So if you think, if you find yourself thinking about, I really should be exercising right now, I'm just not motivated, those nudges aren't really helping me, try to think about what physical and mood or emotional effects you're hoping to get from the exercise. And just as important as the why is to start small with your exercise. And I've already mentioned this before. And I know we spent a lot of time talking about, how is exercise done ideally for certain durations, specific intensities, and so forth. But really, until exercise is a habit, it's best to start small to build that habit. And we as humans have a hard time, planning too far out into the future. We're more likely to be motivated by short-term goals and attainment. So we wouldn't suggest starting out an exercise routine, thinking about how you still need to be doing it months from now. It's more productive to think in short-term goals, like I'm just going to exercise this afternoon, or I'm going to try to exercise 3 times this week. Okay. So think about what's one tiny exercise action you can take to boost yourself. Maybe it's just to do 2 push-ups. Maybe it's to walk to the end of your driveway and back. Could you stand or walk around while talking on the phone versus sitting? How about taking the stairs? Can you park farther away from the store? How about you stretch while you're watching TV? A lot of different examples, and they're all just very simple options to, again, start small, get moving to help you build that habit. And finally here, it can be really useful to understand that when you're exercising regularly, you may be experiencing changes in your body that you can't even pick up on. And we get it. It can be very frustrating to not see results right away. So that's why focusing on small wins along the way can help you stay motivated to reach those bigger and slower moving outcomes. So remember that even if you can't obviously tell that day, that exercises is making you healthier, know that in reality, it actually is. So I'm going to turn it back over to Bree so we can actually do some exercises.
Thank you, Sarah. And we're getting there. We're almost there. So now we're going to put all this information into practice and move into the exercise portion. So we're going to begin by addressing exercise intensity. I want you to think about when you are working out, are you doing too much or not enough? There's a really simple way to know, and it's called your target heart rate range. For example, my target heart rate range for a moderate intensity exercise is 152 to 162 beats per minute. So if my heart rate is within that range, then I know I'm working hard enough. Like you see in this example, the target heart rate range is a zone representing an intensity level at which you're working. So that intensity level depends on how you calculate it. And we need to keep in mind that some or any kind of exercise is always better than none, regardless of the intensity you're using. But research does show that moderate to vigorous intensity activity is needed to increase your cardiorespiratory fitness. So today, right now, we're going to calculate a personalized target heart rate range together so that you have that personalized range that you can use while you're exercising to gauge the intensity you're working at. And if you have a very specific goal of increasing your cardiorespiratory fitness, then this is especially for you. So for beginners new to exercise, the recommended intensity level is 50 to 60% of the heart rate reserve. And I'll talk about what that is in a moment. Moderate intensity is 64 to 76%, and vigorous is 77 to 93% of the heart rate reserve. So unless you're a beginner, I usually recommend that you are working at a moderate intensity. And I usually suggest a 10% range. So for example, 60 to 70 or 65 to 75%. But again, this range is going to be based on your fitness level, and you may need to increase the intensity as you become more fit. So the first step to calculating your target heart rate range is to find your resting heart rate. And so to do this, we're going to do it right now together, but you're going to place the tips of your first two fingers and press lightly on the inside of your wrist. So you want to be on the thumb side. I want everyone to try that. Can everyone find their radial pulse? And if you know how to use the thumbs up feature, you can give me a thumbs up, or you can just shout out over Zoom. Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up. Okay, so when I say start, pull up my timer. When I say start, you're going to start counting those beats. And when I say stop, you'll stop. All right, here we go and start. Stop. Okay, now take that number and multiply by 6. So either use that calculator you gathered prior to the presentation, or you can use this chart I have up on the screen. And then that is your resting heart rate. So give everyone a moment. Make sure you write that number down, because we are going to be using it in our next calculations. Does everyone have that down? And if you can give me a thumbs up or just shout out over your mic. Okay, I am seeing thumbs up. Moving on. So we found our resting heart rate. Moving on to step 2, we're going to calculate our maximum heart rate. For this, you're going to take 220 minus your age. So I have an example for someone who is 65 here in the blue text. So go ahead and calculate that now. And again, give me a thumbs up when you're ready to move on. Looks like I have 4 thumbs up. All right, we'll move on to the next step. Thank you, Sarah. So the third step is to calculate your heart rate reserve. This is your maximum heart rate, which is the one we just calculated, minus your resting heart rate. So in the example I have up here, it's going to be 155 minus 84, and that is your heart rate reserve. So go ahead and calculate this next step. And again, thumbs up or just unmute and shout out, you're done. All right, we will move on. So next we need to select our intensity range. For your target heart rate range, you're going to have two numbers, just like I showed you in that first example, a low number and a high number. So those two numbers represent the range that you should be working in according to the intensity you selected. I'm selecting a range of 65 to 75% because I want to work at moderate intensity. And you can see at the bottom here, I've transferred those intensity guidelines over. So if you're a beginner, you may want to select 50 to 60%. But an important note is that when we're calculating this into our equations, it needs to be entered as a percentage. So my 65 to 75% is going to be entered in decimal form as 0.65 and 0.75. And so everyone, I guess, select a 10% range for your intensity. And if you have questions about what you should select, you can ask in the chat or you can unmute. Okay, I don't see any questions, so we're going to move on. All right, we're finally to the last step of calculating our target heart rate range. As you can see on the right side, I transferred my previous calculated numbers over. So my maximum heart rate, my resting heart rate, and my heart rate reserve, as well as my two intensity levels that I selected. So the equation you're going to use here is highlighted in yellow. It is your heart rate reserve times the intensity plus your resting heart rate. So from that example, 71 times 0.65, and then add 84. So I'll give you a moment to do that for the low end. Okay, is everyone ready for the next one? It's just going to be the same thing, but now we're using that high level of intensity. So in my case, it was 0.75. So again, same numbers, 71, our heart rate reserve, times our intensity, plus your resting heart rate. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up when you have both of these done. Thanks, Hannah, too. Thank you, Sarah. Talia, Julie, Rainey, thank you guys. Oh, bunch now. Okay. Gail, Selena, Sammy. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on. I'll just go over the example I've had up. So a person who is 65 years old with a resting heart rate of 84, wanting to work at a moderate intensity, their heart rate should be between 130 and 137. If you guys have questions or maybe you got stumped along the way, you can ask questions at the end of the presentation and we can work with you. Okay, so we're finally getting to the fun stuff. Please go ahead and move to your open space, grab your equipment. If you want me to kind of keep an eye on you while you're exercising or while you're trying these exercises, go ahead and turn your video on. I'm going to try to be scrolling throughout the videos while I'm talking you through these. So hopefully everyone's ready. Today I'm going to teach you about the 7 functional movement patterns. Functional movement exercises, also known as functional movement resistance exercises, or for short, FMR. They're geared towards functional movements that we use in our everyday lives. The idea is to make those muscle groups stronger and to make the movements more efficient and easier to perform, with the goal of improving our quality of movements and our lives. So the 7 basic movements are probably ones you've heard of, but they're squat, lunge, push, pull, hinge, also known as bend, rotation, and gait, which is also known as walking. We're going to go through an exercise for each one and then provide ways to modify and progress your workout. And Sarah is going to be demonstrating for us. So hopefully you can all see her on the spotlight. All right, so moving to our first 3 exercises, you'll need some open space around you, a chair, and then a jug or grocery bags if you'd like to add some weights. So we're going to start, that's perfect, Sarah. We're going to start with squats. And go ahead and have your chair ready, as Sarah does here. The chair is going to be used as a reference point and safety mechanism. So facing away from the chair, only a few inches in front of it, stand up nice and tall with feet shoulder width apart. You're going to lower down like you're going to sit in the chair. Lightly touch the chair with your bottom, but don't sit down. And then stand back up. So that's 1. Try a couple of more. So it's important to keep your knees in the same line with your toes. Or another way to say that, don't let your knee track past your toe. You can put your arms out in front of you like Sarah's done here for more balance. And if you're having trouble, you can either not bend down as much so that you're not touching the chair, or you can sit down completely. But when you stand up, don't use your arms. So Sarah just demoed that. If you're feeling really comfortable with this, you can progress to doing this without the chair. Give Sarah a moment. So here it is without the chair. Nice and low, great job. And you can also hold a weight, such as a jug, either kind of centered at your chest. And Sarah's gonna hold a dumbbell, but again, an empty milk jug works great. You can always add sand, dirt, rocks to it. All right. Let's move on to lunges. So lunges will help improve stability and balance and strengthen the muscle groups for movements involving a staggered position. So things like walking or climbing the stairs. You can think of lunges a lot like walking, but you're going to bend into each step. So make sure you have a nice clear space in front of you. Stand up nice and tall with your feet together. You're going to take a step forward with your right leg and then bend both of your knees, lowering down to the ground. Now pushing off your front foot, return back to a standing position. So now do the same thing, but use the other foot to step forward, lower down, push off that front leg and back together. So that's 1 rep. Try this 1 or 2 more times to get the feel of it. I'm going to scroll through our video to see if anyone has their camera on. We do not. That is okay. Ideally, both knees will be at 90 degrees, but just go as low as you feel comfortable. And a lot like the squat, it's important to keep your knee in line with your big toe. We don't want the knee to go past the foot. If you're having trouble with balance, you can hold on to a chair or even use the wall to just slide your hand along it. So Sarah's going to demo that really quick. So you can see her arm is up and she's just using that to help with balance. Great job. Sarah's looking great. We're going to move on to our next movement, which is the hinge, also called a bend. A hinge is used when picking up things from the floor. For example, picking up grocery bags or doing laundry. It's very similar to the squat, but the movement comes all from the hips. So Sarah's going to first demonstrate this hinge motion because it can be complicated, but she's going to begin by engaging her core. So abs are nice and tight. She's going to have loose knees, and then she's going to send the hips back. Okay, and now standing back up. Great. I usually recommend getting the motion down first and then adding weights like a kettlebell, a weighted jog, or grocery bags. So now it's your turn to try. You're going to begin in a standing position, feet shoulder width apart or slightly more. You're going to engage your core, pulling your belly button to your spine. Second, loose knees. So we're having a soft bend. And now all the motion comes from your hips just send them back until you feel tension in your hamstrings. And then fourth, stand up. Okay, do a couple more. So I want you to watch what happens if we do this with straight legs. Sarah's going to show you how not to do this. So you can see her legs are straight, her spine is curved, and that's going to actually cause a lot of just tension in the lower back, and this can hurt your back. So we want to avoid this. We want our center of gravity over our knees. The back is straight and the shoulders are pulled back. Then you stand up. So this is the proper way we should be lifting objects around our house. And if anyone's having issues with this movement, please speak up or ask for help. This is probably the most complicated movement to get down, and we have some modifications that we can help you with if you need some more pointers. All right, we're going to move on to wall push-ups. This is an easy and great exercise you can do anywhere there's a wall. You're going to put your hands flat against the wall, slightly lower than shoulder height, with your arms extended and your body at an angle. You're going to keep your body in a straight line. I know, Sarah, we're going to be looking. There we go. Perfect. So again, you can see her body is slightly at an angle. Her arms are extended out in front. Her hands are a little bit lower than shoulder height. So you're going to lower your body towards the wall, keeping it in a straight line, and then push back up. So that's one. Do a couple more just to get the feel. Now, the closer you stand to the wall, the easier it is. And the farther you stand away from the wall, the harder it's going to be. You can also put your feet in a split stance, meaning one foot closer to the wall and the other farther away, which is going to make this easier as well. When you're comfortable with this, you can mix it up by putting your hands closer together or farther apart. And that's going to just work the muscles a little bit differently, your triceps versus your chest muscles. All right, looks good. We're going to move on to the pulling motion, which is going to be an upright row. You'll begin by grabbing your weighted grocery bag and holding a handle in each hand. Let's utilize that hinge motion we just learned. Good job, Sarah. Feet should be shoulder width apart, nice and tall stance with your core engaged. Next, you're going to pull those elbows up just above or at parallel. So you can see Sarah's arms are parallel. Let's do a couple more. You want to think about squeezing the shoulder blades while you're doing this exercise. So to make this more challenging, you can add more weight to your bag. And if it's too hard, take some weight out. Just do the motion if that feels comfortable. Next, we're going to move on to the rotation movement, which is a standing Russian twist. You're going to begin by grabbing a weight and standing feet shoulder width apart or slightly wider. Give Sarah a second. And you're going to slightly bend the knees. So just a nice soft bend. Arms are out in front. And then you're going to twist only from the waist, going about 45 degrees. And then back to center. Twist the other direction. And back to center. So that's one rep. Again, you want to make sure you're twisting only from the waist. You should not be twisting at the knees. An example of this, like think about if you've ever had a really stiff neck and you can't turn your head, you kind of turn your whole torso. So your head and your hips are in one line as you're moving. If you find that holding the weight out in front of you is too challenging, you can bring the weight closer to your chest. And that is going to make the exercise a little bit easier. And to progress this exercise, once you feel comfortable with a weight, you can always add a little bit more weight, or you can move to the floor and do this from a seated position. All right, we'll wait for Sarah. Sarah's going to demo this on the floor here. Great job. So that's what it looks like from the floor. All right, thank you, Sarah. So the last functional movement is walking. And as Sarah mentioned, walking every day can greatly reduce your risk. Doing 30 minutes a day at 112 steps a minute is only 3,360 steps. So it's a lot smaller than that original 10,000 they recommended. This pace equates to about 2.7 on the treadmill. And there are several free apps that you can track your steps if you like to walk outside. I have those apps listed here. Pacer, Charity Mile, Fitbit. These are all examples of free apps that you can use. So again, these are the basic functional movements. And once you're comfortable with these movements, I encourage you to challenge yourself by combining several into one exercise or one fluid movement. And Sarah's, yep, I'm gonna make Sarah get up again. For example, we can do the hinge exercise and add a pull or add an upright row at the end of it. So for the hinge, you're gonna grab your grocery bag, you're gonna watch her hinge, and then she's gonna pull the elbows up at the end. Couple more. So as the legs bend, the arms lower, and as she stands up, she's pulling that weighted grocery bag up. So another example is combining a squat with a push motion at the top. We'll let her grab. So you can see she's going to squat down. And as she pushes up, the arms are also going to push. When you're just trying this, you can kind of segment the movements so that you just do a squat and then you push at the top. When you get comfortable with that, you can do more of a fluid movement like you just see Sarah doing now. Think about the arms and the legs being connected. All right. Thank you, Sarah, for demoing. You did a great job. And I hope you guys were able to follow along with some of these exercises and that you learned something new.
All right, so just to wrap things up here, we provided some resources on the topics of Alzheimer's disease or physical activity. And Bree and I wanted to do our part in facilitating your exercise journeys. So we'll be providing you with a resource packet that includes links to the various online classes to try out, exercises to try out at home, including the ones we just went through, and some of the tools that we discussed, like the talk test, how to measure your heart rate, and calculating your target heart rate range. And so you'll be receiving that by email, and we hope that you find that beneficial. And then, all right, lastly, we just want to thank our principal investigator, Dr. Ozioma Okonkwo, as well as our Okonkwo Lab family for providing us with endless encouragement and support, as well as the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute and Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, and all the participants that give their time and body and energy to help us advance our understanding of this disease. And thanking all of you for taking time out of your day to spend it with us. And we hope you enjoyed and found it beneficial. And now we want to open it up for any questions anybody has. And you can feel free to put your questions in the chat or just unmute yourself. We're happy to answer questions in either way.
Someone did put in the chat, love these exercises. Thank you, Sarah and Bree.
Thank you. We're glad that you enjoyed them. All right, we're not seeing any other questions here, but Bree and I will also provide our contact information so that you can contact us with any questions that may come up as you move along in your day and in your exercise journey.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And there's no questions or anything, then I guess we'll call it a day, and we'll send around an evaluation with link to the slides around for you very soon.
Okay, thanks for having us, Ian.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes,
It
thank
was
you.
wonderful.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great
Thanks.
day.
And join us next week. We have Hunger Task Force next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Great. Bye, everybody.
Bye.